Okay, so hello and welcome to the Future of Children's Wellbeing Forum. Thank you for joining us. And I know at least some that were meant to be in the audience today and some who will be watching the recording were originally going to come to the live event. So thank you for shifting your plans and joining us here on Zoom. For those that are here, you're obviously welcome to ask questions, as I said, and share your thoughts and opinions on anything we discussed today. But please bear in mind that the event is being recorded and will be shared publicly. So we received amazing interest to attend from all around the UK. So we simply didn't want to restrict access to the event, particularly because of the brilliant speaker we have, Daniel Sobel, that we've lined up for the event today. But also, as you may know, it's Mental Health Awareness Week. So we felt it the right thing to do to bring this online and make it free and open to everyone. We did have a number of really amazing exhibitors lined up for the live show to present their wellbeing services and education services, which unfortunately is not possible here. But I'd like to kind of take a moment to introduce each of them as they were a brilliant support to us. So for more information on each of the exhibitors, including links, and I've been sent through a few documents and various other bits of information. It'll all be shared with the recording and the key takeaways after the event, should you want to learn more about them. So first is Inventors and Makers, who provide practical STEM workshops and clubs for children aged 2 to 11, giving all children the opportunity to be creative, work together and learn in a different way. Just so you know, I'm not on commission or anything. I'm just doing this because they wanted to come along to the event. The Pyramid Clubs, provided by the University of West London, are a special initiative held at schools for children who are shy, quiet, withdrawn, and who may feel anxious about home or school. Whether it's schoolwork or friends, the idea is to develop their confidence and self-esteem and to develop coping skills so they can deal with the things that life throws at them. The Ealing Mental Health Services team, helping children and young people at an earlier stage, can avoid them falling into lifelong struggles with poor mental health. And this led to the formation of mental health service teams. The NHS England led the delivery of one of the key commitments, which is establishing new mental health support teams to develop models of early intervention and support staff in schools and college settings. And from a personal perspective, I know that the Ealing team and the local mental health network in general around Ealing and West London are absolutely amazing. Kooth is an online mental health platform. Kooth are absolutely huge. For young children and young people between 11 and 25 years old, providing an anonymous self-referral digital service that enables children and young people to drop in and find fast, easy and free support that suits them. And finally, the University of West London's outreach, which is obviously another service from the university, which delivers events and programs on and off campus in collaboration with academics, students, charities and museums. Okay, so then just a brief introduction to me. I'm Phil. I'm the co-founder of Book of Beasties, a developer of psychologist endorsed and evidence-based, skipping ahead there, and evidence-based children's entertainment, games and educational content for schools and services that promote better mental health. And I'm your host, Phil. I will tell you a bit more about what Book of Beasties does at the end, but before we get to the brilliant Daniel, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see my face. And don't worry, I won't ramble on much longer. It's, as you know, it's Mental Health Awareness Week this week, and the theme this year being loneliness, something that particularly over the last few years, I think many of us have felt in one way or another, whether we're at home during the lockdown on our own, felt isolated from friends and family, or just kind of got a case of, you know, cabin fever. We're still learning how these years have impacted children and young people in particular. Much of the impact, I think, might not be felt for like many years to come, but loneliness has been one of the main concerns of children and young people and their parents. In fact, around 60 or 76% of parents and carers reported that since lockdown, they have become worried that their children are suffering from loneliness. Parents and carers of 5 to 10-year-olds worry that their children are lonely often or all of the time, whilst parents and carers of 11 to 16-year-olds worry that their children are lonely at least some of the time. It goes without saying that loneliness can reduce social interactivity and therefore development. It causes feelings of sadness, disconnectedness, even in this age of constant connectivity. But it can also knock self-esteem and even encourage us to engage in risky or harmful behaviors. Now, Daniel's topic today is inclusion in the classroom, which we feel ties into the feeling of loneliness. And I spoke to Daniel earlier today, and he said that inclusion can offer a sense of belonging. And I won't delve deep into that, as I don't want to give away any spoilers of his talk or anything like that. But I love that. And it kind of got me thinking about the connection between the two things, and to feel as though you belong somewhere, which wherever that is or whoever that is with, can help you like almost eradicate feelings of loneliness. To feel as though you belong can help with self-confidence, develop meaningful connections and relationships, and even taking positive risks to benefit our lives. I guess in short, it seems as though inclusion can help provide people with their right to be the best version of themselves and live their very best life. But that's enough from me, so I won't go on anymore. That's my that's my take on the matter and opinion. But our speaker today is absolutely fantastic. He is the founder of the Inclusion Expert, who provides consultation, workshops, and support to more than 10,000 schools, helping them develop more inclusive practice. He's penned a number of chart-topping books, such as The Inclusive Classroom and Leading on Pastoral Care, and he is internationally recognized leader in inclusive education. So please, I'll hand over to the brilliant Daniel Sobel.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. Let me start by saying that mental health is something that I have struggled with throughout my life, and it appears in a number of different ways. So actually, when I was at school, I had undiagnosed SEN, I have ADHD, and ADHD in itself isn't a mental health issue, but it is comorbid with ADHD, so it very often goes along with it. And it can sometimes manifest itself into eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. So it's something I'm very familiar with. And I'm no poster boy for mental health, that's for sure. But I've been banging on about mental health for quite a long time, probably even before it became a fad. And I think it's really good that it's become incredibly popular and actually quite surprising of all the things. I mean, actually, you know, somebody asked me recently what was the difference between the state of inclusion today versus, let's say, 30, 40 years ago. And I said, well, principally, you know, pretty much every teacher knows what ADHD and dyslexia and autism is, whereas 30, 40 years ago, they didn't really necessarily. And one of the sort of surprising and quite rapid additions to that sort of knowledge, vast knowledge increase and vast awareness, you know, the human awareness, is the sort of the mental health piece. And it's the kind of thing that, like, once you're aware of it, it's like obvious, and you can never unsee it. Having said that, though, a little bit like SEN and inclusion, not that in my book there's any difference, that there is something potentially quite uncomfortable about it. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. We may sit here and all feel very warm and fuzzy about mental health, but then when you encounter someone who's clearly got mental health issues, it doesn't necessarily help your personal frustrations in dealing with them if they have, let's say, for example, a mental health disorder such as narcissism. And I'm sure that every teacher here will be dealing with parents or even teachers necessarily who have a range of mental health issues. And the way that it comes across and when you actually experience it is they're very annoying. And that's not an uncomfortable thing to admit to. but it's slightly closer to the truth. And so I think on the one hand, we can celebrate the fact that we've gone through a significant evolution. It's almost like an epoch of an evolution, in understanding that we're fragile human beings with lives which we don't necessarily see. They're hidden underneath, and they can significantly impact us. And that manifests itself into many things. But the realities can be quite tough. And so another example of that is that I think, beyond pretty much any other country that I've come across in education systems, we are more trauma informed than any other country. But the realities of dealing with a child who is acting out a common attachment behavior in your classroom, the realities of dealing with that on a Monday morning when you're still tired from having a relaxing weekend, and all of your fears and frustrations as well about the week have suddenly come to the fore. All of your hopes and aspirations are dashed when you're dealing with this kid who's just being really annoying. And actually mental health has this quite dark side to it, which is about how we encounter it and how we fail in dealing with it. And I think that as I lead a master's in inclusive educational leadership, and one of the foundational points is that when dealing with genuinely dealing with difference, with things which are outside of our comfort zone and people outside of our comfort zone, then I think our leading point is admitting our failures and admitting our own vulnerabilities and our own limitations and our own capacity, our own sort of limited capacities. And that's our starting point, really, with genuine mental health. So there's a sort of mental health chit chat talk, which is sort of social media, in the media, thank goodness, it's everywhere, and I'm very pleased about it. And then there's the stark realities of what it's like to confront it in reality, both in terms of you experiencing it yourself and going through, can only describe it as sometimes as suffering, but there's also the encounter of you having to sort of manage someone else's mental health stuff when it's not necessarily the most comfortable thing to do. So I think there's a big training gap for us with schools, and something which I guess fuels my work is the breadth, the sheer quantity of things that we don't train our teachers in sufficiently to be able to meet the needs of children that we are charged to take care of. And there's this phrase in loco parentis that we have a sort of, not just our responsibility is to teach them a subject, but actually to have to express a level of care and concern of this sort of human contact. I mean, the words care and concern are given this sort of Latin phrase in education, in loco parentis. It's almost like a parental. I mean, it seems to refer to a sort of a legal responsibility, but actually hidden within it is the sort of emotional bond that we are humans that bond with each other, that a child needs a parent figure, you know. And so there's our own personal frustrations and upsets, and that are born from a lack of training and knowledge, information, somebody showing me how to do it, you know. And then there's also, we're a profession which I think lacks the requisite support of being what I call a frontline worker. So you have other workers in the front line, such as social workers, psychologists, people who work within mental health as a formal designation of their role. But very often they're given what's called supervision. And by supervision, I don't mean that someone's supervising them, but rather instead they are being supervised. They're being provided with an opportunity to be able to reflect on their work through a personal and emotional prism. Somebody who's a professional psychologist, being able to sort of give them a space, almost like a therapeutic encounter, to be able to reflect on what's happening for them. And we don't do that in education. It's not a common practice. There are schools that are starting to do it. But the danger of not doing it is that, you know, we have teachers who are encountering emotional toxicity and psychological pain and not really having any support or framework to be able to process that. And I think that kind of leads to people building emotional pain in themselves and being quite unconscious about it. And there's something that can be very tough about being a teacher. In fact, it's one of the only subjects that you can study. I remember I did a master's in education psychology, having not got any A-levels or a first degree. I did manage to wangle my way onto a master's in education psychology. And it was something that was one of the topics you could choose as teacher stress. And I thought to myself, how many professions can you study the associated stress with the profession as a common topic in university? It was at the Institute of Education, but I'm sure there are plenty of universities around the world where you can study that. You know, that's a thing. But this stress is the stress burden of the sheer quantity of time and the running around bit. But this is this other element of stress, which is the relationships that can really lead to mental health issues. So within senior leaders, very often getting challenged by certain small percentage of parents can lead to a high increase of mental health issues within senior leaders. So one of the major factors of head teachers exiting the profession is having to deal with the stresses of dealing with quite confrontational meetings, for example. So that's one of the contributing factors. So interestingly enough, during the pandemic, when we hadn't meant to do this online, but it became one of our programs that we were running in Suffolk and in Norfolk, we ran a supervision training program. So to train an individual teacher from quite a lot of different schools to lead a peer supervision group. And I actually didn't think it would work because I thought, oh, it's online, you know, because we were going to do it face to face, but then the pandemic hit. And then we said, well, we'll do it anyway. We'll do it online. And I thought, oh, it's going to be rubbish. But in the end, it was amazing. And I think because of the pandemic, it made it, firstly, people were used to doing things online. It was no longer a weird thing to do. And it became a real excellent thing. So we're trying to roll that out nationally. I think that's quite a useful contribution to the world of teachers and teaching. I'm conscious of the fact that I'm just speaking, but I thought we might do more of a dialogue. I don't know, Phil, if you want to sort of throw questions my way.
Of course.
I'm happy just to carry on rabbiting on. I can speak for Britain, I think.
If anyone has any questions for Daniel, you know, please feel free. But I think, I mean, I have an initial question. What are the biggest in terms of inclusive education? What are the biggest issues that schools face when introducing such a thing, or you know, exploring such a thing?
Inclusion in general.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a particular take on this, which isn't necessarily in the consciousness of, you know, what most people would say their individual answer is. But I think I think there's three common problems, and then I'm going to add a fourth. One is that inclusion, and by inclusion, interestingly enough, every country in the world, I run an organization which supports inclusion in 105 different countries. It's called the IFIP, it's for free, and I recommend it. Please join it. It's www.ifip.group. Please join up. And so we do a lot of work in across Africa and Asia and so on and so forth. But every country's got their own version of what inclusion means. You know, Ethiopia set up 800 inclusion centers, and they all focus on physical disabilities. And they haven't really mentioned anything else other than that as an example. Interestingly enough, Jordan, which I was just dealing with today, they set up quite a comprehensive inclusion program, but there wasn't really much buy-in from teachers and schools. So therein lies the first big problem, which I'd say is true across England as well, which is that you can come up with a fantastic initiative, and the DFE is brilliant at coming up with initiatives, but very few of them actually take. Very few of them actually have a long-term impact. And I think the real reason is because certainly the heart of inclusion, which is very often seen as SEN, although of course it depends which country you're in. In America, by the way, inclusion very often refers to race, culture, and diversity. Which, by the way, in England doesn't have a huge take. Those questions aren't hugely common. You may think they are from the media, but in realities in schools they're not so much. In England, we talk about pupil premium and narrowing the attainment gap as being a major aspect of inclusion, as well as children who are looked after, and safeguarding. So safeguarding is very much under the, whereas, we're just in the middle of training 250,000 teachers in Pakistan, and safeguarding isn't even a thing. We're trying to introduce it, of course, but as an example. So, of course, every country's got their own thing. But what is common is the idea of take-up. And part of the problem with the take-up is that SEN, as an example, always presents itself to teachers as being something which is slightly burdensome, that they have to do yet more. Now, you take a very busy teacher who's super stressed, and I've been a teacher, overwhelmed, getting in at 7 in the morning and leaving at 7 o'clock at night, and working my butt off, and the idea that somebody comes along and said, and can you do yet more for this child? And so I think that inclusion fails because when it requires a teacher to spend more time. So that's the first big barrier. And then for senior leaders, more money when they haven't got money. Okay. And overall, it causes more stress. And those are the real failure points, and that's why it's not taken up. Well, those are the limitations. So we could talk here in the comfort of watching this live or recorded, and we could say wonderful things about mental health, and actually, it's all BS, because what happens I'm not saying it is BS, but I'm saying what really matters is what happens come Monday morning in the realities in schools. And that reality is very much dictated by the skills, the capacity, but also the mood and the abilities and what's practical and so on and so forth. It goes beyond, well, we'd love to. Oh, we're all very inclusive here. And then when you dig down a little bit and you see that, oh, but so-and-so was really struggling in this school, but we found a better school for them. So what they're saying and what they're doing, sometimes there's a very big gulf. And I'm not here to judge that, but rather to sort of say, let's be open and honest and realistic, that some of the biggest barriers to inclusion are about what happens in reality. And the reality is dictated by a lack of time, money, and stress. I'll just say one other thing. This is my fourth point, which is a slightly uncomfortable truth. I like to bounce around uncomfortable truths because I do think that our innovations and our forefront, or our real, it is sometimes a little bit where things aren't said. So this is one of those things, is you can have one teacher who looks at a child and sees a child who is in distress. And you can have another teacher who looks at the same child and sees that child as causing distress. And what is the determining factor there? Not the child, but the teacher. And one of the factors, which I think is a major factor in teaching, which is that you are looking at their level of emotional intelligence, their ability to understand what they are perceiving and what they are bearing witness to. And that there is a knowledge element and a training element, but I think there's also an emotional intelligence element. And I don't think that we as a profession screen. There are schools that I've come across which screen for emotional intelligence. But my guess is the vast majority of people, Phil, who are interested in finding out about mental health, are already pretty emotionally intelligent. And our work is to upskill, is to embrace those people and say thank you so much, and here's a book, and here's a resource, and here's some help, and here's some advice, and yeah, we all make mistakes, so get back to the drawing board, and then there's a percentage of the teaching profession, and it could be 10%, but it could be 30% in some schools, but pretty much in every single school, where you have teachers who just don't get it, or they may say that they get it, but in reality they don't.
I mean, is there a solution to this? I mean, obviously, you've seen funding going to certain things like mental health support and, mental health leads in schools. And is that enough? Is that enough to provide the support that's really required within the school to provide that expert voice? So you do have, okay, two teachers, one sees one thing, one sees another, but then you should have someone there going, well, actually, no, this is the case. So let's deal with it from an expert point of view. What is the solution? Or is there not one at the moment? Is it more complex than, press the green button and everything's fixed, if you see what I mean?
It's possibly not totally dissimilar to the efforts that we make about the environment. It's sort of like, well, I've got a slightly greener car, but it's still a car that's chugging around whatever amount of fuel and fumes, and it's been made in different parts, have come from different countries, and so on and so forth. So like, we can do lots of efforts, but the mechanisms itself to express those efforts are sometimes a little bit misplaced. And that's partly because we're a school system that evolves very slowly. And that's quite important to sort of bear in mind. Our school systems are run by school leaders who are proven and dedicated people to both the education system, and also they're very reliable. Reliable people are not your mavericks who invent and create and push and evolve. Our headship, our school principalships, the leadership of schools is run by people who are quite conservative and who are very reliable. And it's a good example is that the last thing anybody needs from me is to be a school principal, because I'm more inventive and creative and slightly maverick. I wouldn't make a good head teacher. A good head teacher is the opposite of that. So what it means is that to evolve, it's a very, very slow environment to evolve. There is nothing really in the training of school leaders that has to do with how we manage evolution of education, because actually our education system hasn't changed hugely. In bits, it's more like tweaks, but if you were to compare and contrast, apart from certain subjects, and of course you've got media that we use, but the classroom today looks quite similar to the classroom of 30 years ago. It hasn't evolved that much, and so and of course there are schools that do, and there are plenty of schools around the world that do, but they're considered weird or outlander or outliers or maverick and very interesting, but then like back to what we do. So the point is that we've introduced a new vitamin, but it's very difficult to of mental health. It's very difficult to assimilate that into the system. There aren't obvious mechanisms. And so what happens is we'll put them into mechanisms that we think that we recognize, and we think that will have some sort of positive impact. As an example, I was on a panel where I didn't realize they were going to ask me this, but the whole discussion of the panel was about the idea of a mental health charter. Okay, now I said it could be that there are people who who fancy the idea of a charter, and that's exactly what we need. What we need is to chartify something. And for me, that was a very foreign idea. Like, I think the last thing I personally need is a charter. I've never used a charter. I don't like charters. I don't think I'd recognize a charter if it slapped me in the face. But there's an example of, well, maybe for some people that's useful, and I was trying to say that in some humility, maybe that is useful, but there's probably a good example of, well, we've kind of got this idea of mental health and we need to get it into the education system. So what mechanism can we use to get it into the system? And so you find there are certain mechanisms, but frankly, the majority of mechanisms are not quite right. So for example, you can pretty much think of vast majority of examples about how we get mental health into the education system. Most of them are like, maybe, really, but what's the evidence for that? And do you really think that's going to change things? And so broadly speaking, I have a bit of a skepticism that it lies much beyond how each individual is able to embrace their own personal learning journey through mental health. It could be that it could be that I read a particular book or I had a particular personal encounter with whatever, and that had a huge impact on me and has influenced my work. That isn't something which is structured by the DFE or structured by this particular training program. I don't think anyone ever changed their mind because they did a CPD program. Yeah. And as I said to you, Phil, probably the majority of people who are here are already here because, they're interested in what you're doing, Phil. They're interested in the subject already. You're already preaching to the converted. That sounds a little bit sort of negative, possibly, but I think I'm all for trying to be really brutally honest.
There is a slow. I mean, there's no. For my last question, I know there's no final solution. It is about having an armory of solutions that you can deliver and that cater to different people's needs. And I'm not just talking about the people that will benefit from those solutions, but the people that deliver them. So, one person, as you said, they might be completely inspired by a book they've read and they want to go out there and use the most crazy thing to support the children, to support their pupils with their well-being. And you've got someone else that needs a charter, that needs, a really formalized method to do it. I think there isn't any single solution. But I think the general vibe, and you're saying preaching to the converted, and I think the general vibe is people are, in general, like not just a select few, really coming to, the realization that mental health support needs to be of top priority, and not just that, many other things as well. But I mean, is that kind of acceptance something that you're seeing across the board, and not just in this country, like everywhere? Like, I know you said, say, in India there wasn't, they don't have safeguarding, but are they thinking about it? Is there a kind of expansion in mindset in terms of these things?
Yes, it's definitely cropping up on the international scene. So it's being discussed in UNESCO and UNICEF and so on and so forth. It's definitely being talked about. There are World Bank projects to do with mental health and so on and so forth. And it's really, the pandemic has sort of really increased that. I want to give you some alternative sort of very practical things, because I'm afraid that partly what happens when I talk about policy is it seems very removed from what happens in reality, like practice on the ground. So I thought, as we were talking, maybe if I add a couple of very practical things that people could do
yes,
in their
please.
schools.
That would be amazing.
There is something which we couldn't really do during the pandemic in a really sort of formalized way, but I think that sort of very much at the heart of my work is the idea of relationship between teacher and child and family. And I think that it's usually possible. It's not going to be possible in every single school, but wherever it is possible, be really powerful for, and I recommend this to most people listening, I suppose, is to do a home visit, especially to homes which you haven't necessarily, because many teachers come from a sort of more of a middle class sort of type background. But if you go to visit a home and visit one of your students' homes, visit with a parent from a housing estate or a single parent who may be struggling or whatever, and go and visit. Don't go on your own because there are complications that will arise from that, but you go with another person. And my strong recommendation is don't go once, because that feels a bit voyeuristic, but go twice as an expression of care. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it can open your eyes in a way, or you open your heart in a way to understanding where some of your children are really coming from. And it helps with understanding, and it helps with relationship bonding and relationship building. So I think that's a really valuable idea, that when two humans encounter each other in a very human way, and sometimes the teacher pupil, when I was first started teaching, I was always told to refer to them not as children but as students or pupils, because that's your job. You have a professional relationship with a child, whereas actually I don't think that's true at all. I think it's an adult to a child relationship at the heart of this, and that it's inescapable, and partly going to have a real personal encounter can help. The second is to call home once a week, not to everybody, but to one or two particularly vulnerable families, only for a minute, and just sort of say, hi, just saying that, just call to say that so-and-so is doing really well in my class, and you must be very proud of them, and I haven't got any further time to speak because I'm rushing off to another lesson. I just want to let you know I was thinking of you, and etc. So I've got to go by. So what you're doing there is you're drip, 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 slowly, that school becomes a source of positivity for that parent. And that is a very powerful act of not just of kindness, but it changes the discourse very often, because there are negative cycles of discourse. The child has experienced something very negative at home, expresses negative behaviors in school contacts home to say how negative the child is, and there's a negative discussion. Whereas one of the things that we can do is we can call home as positivity, so the school becomes a source of positivity for the parent. The parent can look forward to having conversations with the school. The parent can feel positive about their child being in school, especially if they themselves have had a negative experience at school, themselves. So it's about changing the narratives, the narrative landscape, from being a cycle of negativity to a virtuous and positive cycle. And that's something that can be done very simply, and not through big initiatives and big training programs and all of that. It's literally picking up the phone. I don't mean sending a text or writing something in the book, and so on. I think there's a couple of other things which would be really quite useful. I put in my my green book about some sort of training in transactional analysis. I don't mean a big formal training, even though I did a master's in psychotherapy as well, and I just find transaction analysis extremely useful. But just to know a little bit about it, so knowing about how your voice, how your words can have a significant impact on the feeling of another, and so thinking about how you can speak like a dominating or authoritative parent, speak as an adult, which is more of a sort of neutral way, or speak as a child with a sense of frustration or upset and neediness, and that how you and somebody who's experiencing mental health challenges can have those sort of complicated dialogue, just knowing some of the very basic, simple strategies. So, for example, there's a very common, certainly senior leaders will know this. There's something called the Copman drama triangle. I don't know if you've come across it, but I recommend it. And again, I wrote about it in my green book, Leading on Pastoral Care, which is that you can have one character in the room who's frustrated and angry at the other, and the other one is the accuser, the other one who's the defender, and another one who's trying to be a rescuer. And what happens is that they have a sort of almost predetermined conversation, and every so often they shift around the triangle, and they shift their position. So the accuser becomes the accused at one point, right? And then somebody else becomes the rescuer, and they play this game. And it's a very common and predictable game. I think just simply being aware of it, being aware of that very common activity will help, not necessarily thwart it, but simply help you understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's true of a lot of things where there is frustrations. Where there is frustration is having a level of understanding. So the common, most frustrating behaviors around ADHD or attachment or even ASD presentations of behavior challenges, they're things that we can understand, and understanding gives a lot more, it takes away a lot of the stress, because it feels less personal, and it's less about you as a failure with this child. And actually you realize, oh, that's quite common and it's okay. And there are things that I can do about it. And then, of course, there are things where I can't do about it. And it's good to know what those are. I was just been rabbiting on a few very practical solutions. I wanted to be practical, Phil. So I've done my practical bit.
I think the reframing of mindsets is such a powerful thing, and again, seeing it's normal, seeing something from someone else's perspective, and as you said, shifting around the triangle is a really, really powerful way to help you understand where the other person is at. And I think could that work also with pupils as well? If you have a child that has that is SEN, and helping other children, instead of helping that child fit in with those children, helping those children accept that child, is that, firstly, how can you do that? And what are there some methods to help those children accept the child that to them is a bit different? And is that a good way of doing it?
I came across a concept, is an African concept called Ubuntu, and it lays out the framework completely differently in a bit of a revolutionary way. I'll just explain. It goes like this. The idea is that we all either succeed in, let's say, passing this exam, or we all fail. So once you throw that cat amongst the pigeons, suddenly everyone sees each other not as a competitive rival, or as it's all about me and what grades I'm going to get. And frankly, I care about me and I don't care about anyone else. Suddenly, we are a we, and we either sink or swim together. The obvious sort of African link is that we as a village, we either live or die together, right? So so that's a very interesting, a completely different approach, but it does sort of highlight how this sort of isolated competitive nature of how we educate our children and then sort of do formal assessments, which is all about the individual. It is a different way of reframing, and I did write about that in one of my chapters, about reframing what it means to belong, or to become part of a community and to really feel it. So I feel that quite a lot of the education systems and mechanisms get in the way of children naturally feeling like they belong with each other. Generally, you put a bunch of children together, they'll mix. They might not get on all the time in the perfect way, but actually having fractious conversations or angry moments or hitting each other or whatever it is all part and parcel of the learning process about how to interact and learn to sort of socialize with each other, or that's all part of social skills formation, and you see that's completely normal. But they don't have their preconceived ideas of who to accept and who not to accept are not really innate. They're given, they're provided by either the education system, because the education system is divvied up who's better and who's worse. Sure. Right? Who's quicker, who's faster, who's cleverer, who's more stupid, they've got problems, so we do a job of imposing divisions on children. Children aren't really dividers themselves. They're sort of more, they etc. So I think there's work to do on a whole school basis on that. There is a piece of work also around how we set up group work. And interestingly, I wrote this in my latest book, a chapter on group work. It's very common within pretty much most classrooms. At some point we will do interact with a group. but it's very rare. I mean, I challenge you to find many or any books on and how to do that. And actually that is inclusion in a microcosm right there in that group. And that is very much determined by how comfortable or how comfortable children feel like they belong in that particular micro group. And the comfort is, so you may have a very loud kid, but partly they're being allowed to distract from the fact that they don't feel like they can participate in this particular exercise effectively. Or you have a very quiet kid who doesn't really want to, who's the particularly bright one, doesn't really want to have anything to do with this particular two children who he really hates, or whatever it is. But we are putting together these groups. So we need to take some responsibility for the participation element. So I think that's worth looking into as a teacher. It's really interesting on a sort of group psychology and group dynamics sort of viewpoint.
Fantastic. Well, Daniel, because I'm quite conscious of time, I wondered if you could share with us some information about your books and where people can find out more information about you.
Oh, that's very kind. Well, behind me are the books. So there's the Attainment Gap book in blue. That's about social mobility and children from impoverished backgrounds. The Leading on Pastoral Care, which is the green book, and that is aimed at heads of year, heads of key stage, and form tutors and so on. It's and Senkos. And then there's the yellow book, which is the Inclusive Classroom, which is trending at #1 on Amazon at the moment for the last year, and it's all about pedagogy and how to do it, how to include all children. So you can find me on LinkedIn, because I'm very active on LinkedIn. My website is inclusionexpert.com, and the ifip.group is a place where you can interact with inclusionistas from all over the world. And we run that master's program in inclusive educational leadership, so happy to be in touch with that. And we're just launching now the Global Inclusive Teaching Initiative. We call it GITI, the Global Inclusive Teaching Initiative, which is a course which I've co-authored with 4 other, they're leading people in the world in inclusion. Professor Carol Tomlinson is very much the grandmother of inclusion from America. I think she invented the word differentiation. Helena Wahlberg from Sweden, and a bunch of others. And our aim is to sort of get this quality of training, make it available for millions of teachers around the world, and we're doing that hand in glove with UNESCO. So please look that up. Information about that is available on the ifip.group website. So please see that there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will share all that information around with the key takeaways after this. I'll send it to everyone here and everyone along with the recording. But thank you so much, Daniel. That was brilliant and absolutely fascinating. I'm conscious of time, so I'll just finish on saying thank you for coming and a brief introduction to Book of Beasties and what we do. If my computer unfreezes, there we go. So Book of Beasties is a developer of mental wellness games and digital resources that help children find the language to talk about their mental health and well-being and reframe, as we were discussing, reframe their mindset on the topic of well-being and mental health and what it actually means. We're advocate users of playful learning to address serious topics, and all of our endorsed and validated materials are for Key Stage 1 all the way through to Key Stage 3 demographic. And to date, we're in just over 500 schools and supporting more than 100,000 children with their well-being across multiple sectors. Our primary resource is the mental wellness card game, which, as with all of our resources, uses play, creativity, and storytelling to raise emotional literacy, teach resilience and empathy, and introduce really practical solutions that the children can remember and use should any issues arise. And most prominently, it's about encouraging the conversation about well-being, about absolutely everything. We just break down the stigma, break down the barriers, and encourage them in this fun and engaging environment to talk. Our social emotional, or ever-growing social emotional learning resource platform, which I'm going to sign you all up to, if you're happy for me to do so, and I'll send around for the people that signed up to the event today. I'll send you all a login details so you can access more than 200 SEL activities and worksheets and videos, just making, again, this topic more fun, more colourful, and just a less tough thing for children to engage with. So if you would like any more information about Book of Beasties or Daniel or anything that you've heard about today, any of our exhibitors, then please get in contact with me at philT@bookofbeasties.com. You can visit bookofbeasties.com or obviously check us out on social media, give us a like and a share and make friends with us. But as I said, I'll follow up with this event. I'll follow up this event with a recording and with the key takeaways. And it's been absolutely wonderful to see you all here. And Daniel, it's been absolutely brilliant meeting you and listening to you. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of the week and a weekend. See you soon.